All right, thank you. All right, so we are in 47, starting with verse 13 again, and we're talking about the borders of the land. So the first part of 47, we talked about the healing waters, we talked about the trees, we talked about the fruit, we talked about all of those things. Now we're going to talk about the division of the land. And so God is going to divide the land among the 12 tribes of Israel, and it says Joseph shall have 2 portions. Now, all of you are familiar, I'm sure, with the reasoning behind that, right? So there's the whole story in Genesis when Jacob is blessing the sons of Joseph, and so Manasseh and Ephraim get the portions from their father on that, and so that's what he's talking about here. He says and that's Genesis 13, Genesis 15, and there you can read all about that story if you need some refresher. On verse 14 it says, you shall inherit it equally with one another, for I raised my hand in an oath to give it to your fathers, and this land shall fall to you as an inheritance. So why are the tribes of Israel all getting this land? Because God promised it to his people that at some point that the land that he gives to them is going to be divided amongst them. So we know that there are, we're going to see when we get over here and to our next chapter, I'm going to have more maps for you. We've got some ideas of, we can see that the land is going to be divided in different ways in the Bible. It's very difficult to sometimes see how the divisions are going to go, but there's always a portion of it that goes from the river in Egypt to the Euphrates River. Now, for a long time, people believed that the river in Egypt meant the Nile River, and that's understandable. But the belief system now is that that is no longer, that when he's talking about that, he doesn't use, in the original Hebrew, he doesn't use the terminology for the Nile River, and that it doesn't go as far as the Nile River, that it goes to one of the wadis, which is a river that sits at the, and we're going to look at the map in the next chapter, it sits at the border of where Egypt and Israel are, very close to that. And so one of the wadis of Egypt up to the Euphrates River. When we look at the map, you'll see that the Euphrates River flows down like this through the top, and so there's going to be some discrepancy we're going to see on exactly how that border line is going to sit, because the river Euphrates is a long river. Now there's some other markers here, all these hard names that Jane had to read off. The problem is, the majority of those, we don't know where they're at. They're not towns. Scholars will say, to the best of our ability, we think that this is probably this. We think that this one is probably that. But there's discrepancy there. And because the land has changed and the maps have changed, and this is a very long time ago, it's not really sure where all of these are. Did you have something?
But this is future. So
right.
Everything's going to change after
exactly.
It could be future towns.
It could be very different at that time. That's a very good point. So I'm only bringing that up to you, that with all of those little things, what we're going to see as we finish this and go as specifically into 48 is that the borders of what the land of Israel encompasses is really up in the air. It's kind of the best guess scenario. And I'm going to show you 2 different best guess scenarios based on what people think. But there are others out there. If you choose to, you can go and do a lot of research on this and spend a lot of times and come up with who you believe maybe has the best borders. I did that and I drove myself crazy. I really did. And then all of a sudden a light went on and I realized it's not really up to me to define the borders for you guys and to get this all. It's to say that there's discussion on where these borders are. Whatever the borders are, God knows exactly how he's going to divide this land. It's not going to be like when Joshua divided the land. They threw lots. And it was decided by lots where the tribes were going to stay. It wasn't equally divided. It was chosen by Lot, and whoever got the luck of the draw, that's where they stayed. This is not it. God has decided exactly where in this time the 12 tribes of Israel are going to be dispersed, and it's going to be divided equally amongst them, and we'll get into that a little bit more.
Resources within that land, not necessarily, you could have huge borders and no resources.
Exactly. And so then he begins to go, verse 15, there shall be the border of the land on the north from the great sea, and he begins to describe it. I can't pronounce all these, by the road to Hethlon, one that goes to Zedad, Hamath, Berotha, Cybrium, which is between the border of Damascus and the border of Hamath, to Hazar Hatticon, which is on the border of Haran. These are all places that, with the exception of a few things, Damascus being one, most people are just not sure exactly where these are or what exactly what towns they're talking about here. 17, thus the border shall be from the sea to Hazar Enan, the border of Damascus, and as for the northward, it is the border of Hamath. That's the north side. So God's very sure. He knows where it's at, exactly where it's at. On the east side, you shall mark out the borders from between Haran and Damascus, and between Gilead and the land of Israel, along the Jordan, and along the eastern side of the sea. This is going to be the east side. Verse 19, the south side toward the south shall be from Tamar to the waters of Meribah, to Kadesh, along the brook to the great sea. This is the south side toward the south. The west side shall be the great sea from the southern boundary until one comes to a point opposite Hamath, and this is the west side. Again, when we're reading this, the most important thing that we need to understand here is God has a very clear understanding of exactly where he has all of these borders at. It appears to most people that this includes most of Lebanon, a great deal of Syria. These are best guess scenarios. All right, and then when you go to verse 21, it says, thus you shall divide the land among yourselves according to the tribes of Israel. And it shall be that you will divide it by lot as an inheritance for yourself, and for the strangers who dwell among you, and who may bear children among you. They shall be to you as a native born among the children of Israel, and they shall have an inheritance with you among the tribes of Israel. Okay, let's take a minute and break that down. So he's calling it several times what? An inheritance. Isn't that, I mean, over and over again, we see that there. How many of you remember in Daniel, the very last verse of Daniel when we went through there, it says, this is chapter 12, verse 13, it says, but you, Daniel, go your way until the end, for you shall rest and arise to your inheritance at the end of the days.
So the
And so-
strangers that he's talking about are the captivity?
No. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is this inheritance that is for the Jewish people is the inheritance that they've been promised from long ago. Each one of them knew that this was what was coming, that there was going to come a time where their tribes were going to receive this allotment from the Lord, that it was going to be their inheritance to receive. He adds, answering your question, Mom, he adds, and that the stranger who dwells among you. Now, in the eyes of God, who is always the stranger?
Gentile.
The non-Jew. If you're not a Jew, you're a stranger. And so he's talking about in this millennial kingdom time, there are going to be people who are not of the 12 tribes of Israel who are going to come and live among you. Now, if they come and live among you, what must they do?
Act like a Jew.
Okay, well, yeah.
Except the Jewish.
Exactly. I know what you're saying. To accept the ways that God has provided, to accept the God of Israel, to accept the rules and regulations that are being set down, to follow in that, to not fight against it, to act just like the tribes are acting. And they're going to come amongst the Jewish people, and they're going, it says what? You're going to what? Bear, some of them are going to bear children. There you go. There's one of our, we've talked about children being born in this millennial kingdom time. Here's one of the reasons that we know that that is going to happen. So these babies that are going to be born among these natural, human-bodied people who are living amongst also people who are in their glorified bodies. Again, we've never seen that. We don't know what that looks like. How is that all gonna be? I don't know. We've never seen a time of that before. But we know that there are gonna be human beings living there amongst this land. They're gonna associate themselves with one of the tribes. When they do that and connect with one of the tribes, bear children and live amongst them and work and do all of that,
And marry them.
and marry amongst them, it says that they are going to have an inheritance with you among the tribe of Israel. So they're going to be able to live there, and it's their inheritance also, which really fits in beautifully with our understanding when we went into Romans, even though we only did 3 chapters, when we talked about what happens when you become a believer. You're grafted in, right? You become part of the Lord's Israel, the believing portion of Israel, and you become an adopted son or daughter. And so if you have a natural born child and an adopted child, they have the same rights legally, right? It doesn't matter if they're naturally born out of your body or if you've adopted them. Legally, they have all of the same rights. And in God's eyes, he's saying it's the same. It doesn't, it isn't dependent upon just the 12 tribes. Those who come and live amongst you will also receive that same thing. And so he says in verse 23, and it shall be that in whatever tribe the stranger dwells, there you shall give him his inheritance. And so it's the same for him that it was. And then also one other point that we're gonna make, and we're gonna make it in our next chapter really, is when he divides the land up, it is going to be of equal size, equal portions. So let's look at chapter 48, and there's a lot of names there that we're going to have to read also. I don't know, do we need to turn the tape off while we do our reading and restart it? This is a little bit unusual.